Right, that should work. Hello everyone, welcome and very, very happy Ada Lovelace Day. Today marks an international celebration of the achievements of women in STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths. And today we'll be discussing gender and LGBTQ+ in the workplace. Now, before we start the session, I just wanted to remind everyone about the history of Ada Lovelace Day, which was founded in 2009 and was inspired by the world's first computer programmer, Ada Lovelace, who was a leading 19th century mathematician in a time when women had little access to basic education. Ada is considered to have written the world's first machine algorithm for an early computer. Now, Ada Lovelace Day is aimed all about increasing the profiles of women in STEM, and in doing so, creating new role models, advocates, educators who will encourage more girls into STEM careers and support women already working in STEM. Now, some of you will know from being part of the BEEqual community, but last year we decided to change our name from Women in Tech London to BEEqual, which stands for Balanced, Empowered, Equal, and to really encompass our views that gender is no longer as simple as male and female, and quite rightly so. And we felt the need to engage allies and champions into the conversation. Preaching to the converted is not going to make that change happen. That's what it's all about. I'm just going to check. Okay, now with this all in mind, for Ada Lovelace Day this year, BEEqual wanted to not only celebrate the amazing achievements of women in STEM, but to also have an open conversation about gender and sexual orientation in the workplace in order to help create more inclusive work environments for everyone. Now, today, you've obviously done my quick welcome. I've sped through that. We're basically going to be having a panel discussion and a Q&A. Now, I have got some themes of discussion, but at any point, please, please, please fire over your questions via the chat box and we'll prioritise them. If you do have a particular panellist that you would like to direct your question at, then also just make me aware of that and I can ask them directly. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to our fabulous panellists who have bravely volunteered to answer all your questions today. So let's start off with Cade. Do you want to give us a wave?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Cade Friedenbach. I use he and they pronouns. I identify as a transmasculine, queer, non-binary person. I'm a software engineer based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And I am here today representing an organization called Out in Tech, which is a global nonprofit that helps to connect and uphold the LGBT community within tech. My work there, I am on the Digital Core Committee, where we activate our membership in order to give back to LGBT organizations around the globe. The way we do that is we run quarterly hackathons to build 10 websites each quarter for LGBT nonprofits or entrepreneurs or activists. We have to date built over 150 websites.
So just quite impressive, really. And I also want to do a special mention to Cade, who is based in America. So it's first thing in the morning over there. So welcome and thank you. Now, gorgeous Katie, do you want to give a little info about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie. Everyone calls me KP, Peth. You can call me whatever you want. I identify as a bisexual cisgendered woman, and you can use female pronouns. So you can use she, her, hers. I'm here today because throughout my life, I've experienced different types of discrimination, whether that's because of my gender, whether that's because of my sexuality. And I'm really passionate about making sure that I'm using my voice and my experience to better people's lives and experiences, and hopefully try and stop discrimination where it happens. So really passionate about that. I work for Education Digital, so DfE Digital, and I'm the digital recruitment lead, which basically means I lead the recruitment of all you lovely people who are dialing in today, which is really exciting. And I'm currently working with the wonderful Harriet, who's sort of hosting us today, on how to make recruitment in digital space anti-racist Alongside that, I'm a mental health first aid instructor, which means that I'm currently on a huge mission to train up loads of mental health first aiders who are there to sort of support and guide people through this really difficult time.
Thanks, Katie. And last but no means least, Rachel, do you want to give a little intro about yourself?
Oh, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Rachel and my pronouns she, her. And I am, I guess by day, I'm a product designer, and for 6 years of my career in that role, I never encountered another woman professionally in the workplace. It was just all men, and I think I'd sort of become used to that, but then I, realised it's not normal, and set up a community for we're women in tech, but with an X, and we are called Triangirls. I'm hoping I can touch on the name later because we know it's not the best name. I do want to talk about that at some point. And we're a community. We host regular meetups, maybe once a month, and we are very passionate about making tech more diverse. And also aside of that, I've spoken at RecFest. That was a recruiters conference, and multiple organisations. I was interviewed by Vice just around the topic of diversity and inclusion. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and I'm seeing the benefits of having these discussions as well for our community, and seeing them get pay rises and promotions and all of the things they should be getting.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the intros. And just to remind everyone, this is all about you. This is an honest, open dialogue. So please get those questions coming in thick and fast via the chat box, and we will be prioritising them. But until then, you've got my set questions to look forward to. So, Rachel, do you actually just want to start us off and talk about the importance of communities, particularly with people who do feel that they're a minority within the tech industry, and that might be a good opportunity for you to give us that overview about Triangirls as well?
Yeah, what I wanted to say here is it's almost like the elephant in the room that our name is Triangirls, and with regard to making everyone feel welcome, we make a point of every event opening up with why we're thus called. And we started life within a community for product designers in tech, which is a Slack group with the name Triangirls, like the shape. And at the point where I joined, I noticed of 300 in that community, there was only 20 that were women. And a friend of mine, we discussed, like, we wanted to know why weren't women participating in any of the conversation. We were finding it was just men talking. It was just walls and walls of men having conversations. So I'm not saying it was perfect, but we created a sub channel within there, which was the shape, and called it Triangirls. And we've actually held forums with our community, and we also had a forum with Facebook because we were working really closely with the recruiters at Facebook. But I think once people understand the story behind it and see our code of conduct, for example, I think, people think, okay, I can understand why it's called that, but we are aware that we don't like the name per se. But with regard to the importance of community, I think, if you're a minority in the workplace, you might not feel like you want to go attend meetups after work, for example, and feel like a minority there. And I think just knowing that your people are somewhere and you can speak to them and you can talk about shared experiences, I think it's just, I can't imagine how you could get through feeling like a minority without the community aspect. And I know, for example, at Triangirls, no men tend to attend. Like we say, like, it's open for everyone, but it's almost like it's not for you, and you could be taking someone else's seat who may be more deserving. And the feedback we get is just phenomenal, that the people we do have attend just say they feel so comfortable and more open to speak. And actually we do lightning talks now at the end of every event, and so many people in our community get up and speak because they feel like they can and they're not being judged. And I think to me that's the real value in it, in that we're giving a voice to people who probably don't feel like they have that voice maybe in the workplace, unfortunately, or often. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. One for you, Katie. I'm quite often asked what the Q stands for in LGBTQ+, and I know that Kate identified as queer as well. Can you clarify exactly what it is and when it's appropriate to use it, and in what context, and also when it's not appropriate to use it?
Yeah, Sure thing. There are so many different iterations of the LGBT plus acronym. I've seen it LGBTQI, A plus I plus Z, but we're talking about the Qs here. So Q stands for two different things. So queer, and then there's also questioning as well, which are two completely separate things. So you might define as queer if you yourself don't identify into one of the very binary types of definitions of sexuality. So let's say, for example, bisexual, gay, lesbian. So these are all sexualities, and you may not define as one of those. Actually, you may not need to. What we find within gender and within sexuality is that from a very, very long time ago, we were put to very set narratives with very set labels and definitions, and that can be really damaging for people. So there was an umbrella term coined, which is queer. So that can be queer within your sexuality, queer within your gender. It essentially means you fit under an umbrella of a community. You are part of a community, as Rachel was just saying, but you don't necessarily define as one of those very binary definitions. Questioning, on the other side, is the same. Is still an umbrella term for people who are still questioning and aren't entirely sure about their sexuality or their identity, and that's also completely okay. I think we are often rushed into making a decision about who we are as a person from a young age, and that can be very damaging for people. And then, what was your question? When can we use it? When should we use it?
And in what context? Because traditionally, being quite honest, traditionally queer wasn't necessarily a positive thing to call someone. It could be quite offensive, but I think there's a confusion between, especially people that were brought up in a time where queer was a negative word to use. It's now okay, and I think there's some confusion between it's now okay. Why is it now okay? In what context?
Yeah, for sure. So you're very right. So queer is sometimes and often used as a slur thrown at people within the LGBT plus community, and it was used to be derogatory and to be a negative thing. And our community has regained the word, and we're taking it back and we're using it as a positive to see ourselves as, yes, we are queer. What I would say is not very helpful, but it does depend on the context in which you're using it. And if you're going to be talking about a particular group of people, or if you're going to be talking about a person themselves, the best thing you can do is ask those people or that person how they want to be identified and when you can use it. I think when we fall into talking about when should we use this, when should we use that, it almost feels like we're expected to speak for the whole community when every individual is so different. So yeah, I completely understand the question. I think the honest answer is you can use it if someone asks you to use it, or you can also be really open and ask someone, is this okay? Is this okay to use it? What would you like me to use? And I think it's about having that open and honest communication, because you're right, even within our community, some people still are not happy with the term.
Thank you, Katie. And Kate, let's have a couple of pronoun questions, because I know that this is a conversation that most people aren't too comfortable with, particularly more because they're just not knowing. What is an appropriate question on gender pronouns? Say, for example, in the workplace, it could be a colleague, it could be someone you're interviewing. What could be an appropriate question when you're just not sure?
So there's a couple of different ways to ask for someone's pronouns. One of the best and most respectful ways that I found was to lead with your own pronouns. If you're just meeting someone of, hey, my name is Kate, I use he and they pronouns. What's your name? What pronouns do you use? Because it kind of normalizes the conversation. It doesn't call them out in terms of how I should identify you. One of the very tricky things is pronouns in written communication, particularly when you're emailing with potentially a candidate or someone you haven't met in person or someone you don't know particularly well, because there are plenty of names out there that don't read one way or another, or that people make assumptions. And so if you include your pronouns in your email signature or lead with them in your conversations, it's a lot easier for people to just pick up what you want. So I have quite a few friends named Joe, who some of them are cis men, some of them are cis women, some of them are trans, and they all use different pronouns. But if you got an email from Joe, there's an assumption that it is potentially a he or a she. depending on your context on that name. In person, it's slightly more awkward. If you've known this person for a long time and you're just not sure. And honestly, if you just swallow your pride and ask, it might be refreshing to and ask the person directly. Don't go around their back to ask about pronouns, because it's really just, that means you're talking about them and it's kind of gotten into gossip territory.
Thanks, Kate. And then it makes perfect sense. Oh, sorry, Rachel, go for it. We've also got someone on the chat, Jen, going yes to beginning with pronouns first. So it's obviously a tool that a couple of people agree with. But Rachel, please.
Something that we did, so Geckoboard, the company I work for, we ran an event, Triangirls, with them, and they got a badge for every single person in our community that said, ask me about my pronouns. And I thought it was really nice because it's almost like, it's encouraging the starting the conversation, and I think everyone just, you know, like it just created a really warm atmosphere. And, you know, I've still got mine, and I think it's on like my jacket. Like, it's just a really nice, I thought it was a nice thing, and I think it helped get people more comfortable, that event, specifically just asking. I've started something, sorry.
I know, we shouldn't, Harriet's going to tell us off in a minute. Talk until the cows come home. But to add on these points, which are so important, for those people who are on the call, who are allies, who don't themselves ever have to think about using pronouns or what their pronouns are, this is for you too. Someone recently asked me, but I've always had the same pronouns. I don't even really know what pronouns mean. A genuine question. So how does that affect me as an ally? This is just as important to allies as it is to everybody else within the community. That is so important. And I just wanted to put that out there.
But Katie, can you explain why it's important? There's going to be some people on the call that are very new to this conversation, and you're telling us that it is, but can you explain, if they say that individual then has to explain it to another colleague, why is it important for cis people to use pronouns or get involved?
Absolutely. So the easiest way that I can explain like why this is the good and the best thing to do is, imagine just for a second that you have to spend every day, every time you join our call, every time you have a video call or you pick up the phone and someone assumes who you are and you have to correct them. Imagine that emotional and physical energy and the emotional and mental capacity it takes to constantly have to reassure people who you are, to constantly have to prove who you are to people. Just imagine for 1 second how that could actually feel for somebody and how tiring it is to do it every day and every minute of your life. And by you as an ally actively doing something, I think, Kate, you just said, it is refreshing to actually have somebody say, and you not have to put it forward and have to think, oh God, I'm meeting people for the first time. I'm going to have to go through this. I'm going to have to go and explain this. And if actually, as an ally, you can just go ahead and you can just say, I identify as X, these are my pronouns, please use them. You're allowing that person just a little bit of breathing space, that little bit of like, oh, okay, I'm in a safe space. And just imagine that mental and emotional energy you're giving back to that person, which they could then spend on work, on more productivity, on being a good person, on volunteering, on being their true selves. So that's why I would say to do it, because every day having to correct people and having to reaffirm who you are is exhausting.
Kate's nodding profusely.
Yep.
Kate's nodding. So, in light of that question, probably the thing that all of us fear, Kate, you might be able to answer this one. What happens if you get the pronouns wrong?
So,
what do you do?
There are a couple things not to do, which is one, completely ignore it and just keep going. Misgendering is very irritating. It kind of alienates someone. It really takes them out of the conversation. But at the same time, don't be overly apologetic about it and make it a huge thing, because that's also alienating. Maybe you messed up halfway through a sentence, go back, correct yourself, and keep going so that the conversation keeps going. If you want to have a conversation with that person afterwards, have it after in potentially a private conversation if it's a group setting. versus calling it out in the moment, because it will become this big thing that's even more alienating. But really, for me, and this is just speaking for myself, many other trans people feel differently, of if you get it wrong, acknowledge it, apologize, and keep moving. Now that goes for if you're talking about someone in the third person, of you're talking about a colleague who uses different pronouns and someone misgenders them, you can be that advocate and say, hey, actually that person uses they pronouns now, and acknowledge it and keep moving it. Because if it's all on the trans person themselves to correct pronouns, it's exhausting and people get out of the habit and it just doesn't ever fully come to fruition. So if you're use someone's pronouns in all contexts, and if you screw up, acknowledge it, apologize, and then kind of move on from the situation.
Now,
is my recommendation.
And I completely get that, but I have had people come to me and explain that when they use the wrong pronoun, it was quite a difficult conversation. Maybe that individual got quite emotional, maybe quite aggressive. Obviously that's worst case scenario, but let's just equip everyone on the call. If that does happen and you're on the receiving end of someone being very upset or slightly aggressive and you've apologized, what can you do as that individual? Obviously assuming that there's no malintent and that it was a complete accident and you've apologized. What do you do if there's continued aggression or emotion?
I think it comes down to your relationship with that person, but you need to reassure them that there was no malintent. Oh, you're right, I got the wrong pronouns. This is really sorry. I'm working on it and I'm trying to make this better. And kind of just being an adult in that situation of I screwed up, I'm owning the mistake and I'm trying to move through it. And also reassure them that that doesn't mean that they think that you're potentially if someone's very upset, they might need reassurance that you're not viewing them in a particular way. It's just a habit that you're trying to break yourself up from versus intentionally misgendering them. Because that honestly, when someone is new to transition or just trying out new pronouns or fairly early on in the process, every single misgendering hurts and it hurts bad. And sometimes it's not you screwing up on pronouns that's really the cause of that emotional outbreak, but it's a buildup to that point, and this just happens to be the breaking point. And they need your reassurance, they need your comfort, they need reassurance that it's all okay. And that being said, it really depends on the person as well. And so it might also be a conversation of, hey, you are really upset about this. I did not mean this. What can I do in the future to make this a little bit better? How would you like me to approach it? Or reassure them by, hey, let's actually talk about this and talk about everything. And I will go back and practice this a lot and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Thanks, Kate. Just so everyone knows, I'm getting quite a few questions around trans and pronouns. So we're just going to take a couple more questions, but we will go on to some other themes later on in the session. But let's just cover some of these first. So one here from Jimmy, thank you. I'm a gender identity representative at my organisation. Hi, Jimmy. And as such, I'm working on documents called Being a Trans Ally to help support trans employees. Are you open to providing feedback to support this and help get the right information and tone out there? So I guess that's one for Cade if out in tech, but that might be one we have to take offline.
Yeah, we can take that offline, but we do have some resources out there that we can help and work through it.
Perfect, Jimmy. So if you want to connect with Cade on LinkedIn, I'm sure he'll be able to take this offline with you. But just for the benefit of everyone else today, we're just going to move on. But thank you so much for your question and keep them coming in. Now, we've got one here. I'm going to answer it live. Given the increasing anti-trans rhetoric in the media and in social media, what does this group see as the best way to communicate the inclusive nature of this group? Facebook, LinkedIn posts using inclusive language of trans and non-binary people tend to get dive bombed with accusations of misogyny. How can the tech community help to take a stand against this?
I think that one might have been aimed at Triangirls community, that question. But from our point of view, I guess we've been lucky in that we've not really had much backlash from anyone really. There was one event that we did for International Women's Day where we were very much accused of misogyny. But I feel like, and it's something that we're going to talk about soon, but allies have been really good for the Triangirls community especially, and I think we've got a really strong group of allies from people who are probably in more dominant positions of power, and they tend to have our back. And often, because we've got such a strong group of allies behind us, we find that they'll sort of step in, which has been very useful. But like I said, we've got a really strong code of conduct within our community that we've been praised on, and that's, you know, forefront on our Eventbrite and on our website too. And we have had lots of people within, you know, trans, especially people within the community, really praise us for that. And I think we also, with our events, try and be as diverse as possible we can with our lineup of speakers. And I think people seeing our diverse panels every time, I think they understand that, you know, we are committed to being diverse. So I think maybe we've been lucky, but we've not really had too, apart from someone getting arrested at an event, which was, I guess, very extreme, but we've not had anything other than that.
Yeah, just to add here, obviously, run BEEqual, which is whoever posted this question. One of the reasons why we changed from Women in Tech London to BEEqual was because we were getting some feedback and questions and well, quite frankly, statements that we just don't agree with. You know, yes, misogyny, but also reverse sexism. And now I've created a code of conduct that outlines that people with those views are not welcome in the community. This is an inclusive space to share ideas, and if they don't share those, obviously come along and hopefully we can change your mind, but if they don't share them, then this isn't the community for you. And that's my honest opinion on it. And if you do experience things like that, myself and Katie had it today before the session with some, I won't go into it, but, you know, a question that just wasn't our values of the event today. Quite frankly, come along, join the event. Hopefully we can change your mind. But if not, yeah, you're just not welcome, because it makes a negative experience for everyone else on the event. But also, this is a safe space. And if views are going to upset someone, then you are not welcome. Does anyone else have anything to add? Because I realised that my point there wasn't too happy.
I can also say that Out in Tech has a very strong code of conduct that we uphold. That's for our in-person events and our online events. One of the things we do with our in-person events is we actually only advertise them about 2 weeks before the event, so that we don't get people showing up and registering that wish harm to the community. We also do a lot of international work with the Digital Core program, and we work with LGBT activists in areas where it's illegal to be gay and it's illegal to be trans, and they're still there working with the community. And so we very much make sure that their private information, their contact information isn't public on their website, that it all goes through third parties, that you can block people who are trying to harass you, are trying to kind of get under your skin. We had this is slightly depressing, but we had a very unfortunate incident happen in India where we were working with this organization and they needed a new website, and they needed it because the old website had personal information of the group leader, and unfortunately someone had found that address, gone to their home and killed them. And so we were working with this group to make sure that everything was very much masked, very much private, as it is not safe to be out in many places. To get back to the trans and the non-binary kind of bombing on Facebook, bombing on Twitter, our sort of approach has been to block the people that are not productive on the posts and to really disengage with the people who are there literally to troll versus to have an actual conversation. And I think we've done a pretty good job with it. The membership that we do have are very engaged, very loving, very safe space, and anyone who doesn't really adhere to that code of conduct is not welcome in that space.
I think we're all just echoing the same message, which is, you know, stick to your code of conduct. This is a safe space community, and it's really important. And I run hundreds of events a year, and a top tip would be if you use something like a Zoom webinar, which we're using today, you can set a setting that only allows people that are registered users of Zoom to join the session. And what that means is that they have to put their full name and email address. So, you know, you would be able to, if they were posting some rather unpleasant questions or trying to hack the session, you know, we would be able to remove, I have the power to remove them from the session, and also would be able to report them to Zoom as well. So if you are thinking about running your own event, obviously those things are not the nice things to consider when you're trying to run a nice event for the community, but do take them in consideration and let me know if you need any top tips or recommendations. Absolutely. Katie, did you have something to say?
No, just echoing and nodding along.
Perfect. So we've got another question for the audience. Are there, and I think this is going to be the last gender pronoun one because we're half an hour in and there are some other themes that are equally as important. Are there any gender pronouns that are being used that are personal to some people in the community but offensive to other members? And if so, how would you handle that situation in a group setting?
I can start on this one. There are gender pronouns that people use that are offensive to other people. That is a legitimate thing. There are some people who use the pronoun it, and other people use that as dehumanizing. But it's a person. The thing is that person uses those pronouns. It's not a personal preference. It's what their pronouns are, and so while it's acknowledging the person's pronouns as respectfully respecting that person's pronouns is more important than the group comfort, in my opinion. So the way I would handle that in a group setting is putting it in the code of conduct, putting it out there. If people use certain pronouns, even if they're offensive to others, it's still important that you use those pronouns in the discussion.
Thanks, Kate. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Just echoing on what Kay's just shared there, I think that there's often language within the community which makes sexuality or gender seem like a choice and an option. And I think, just echoing what Kate said, we have to see someone's pronouns as their pronouns, and it may be that you're very publicly posting your code of conduct, it may be emailing your attendees or whoever it is, if it's a meeting, people are coming along beforehand, letting people know that these are like the really basic things that are going to happen that you have to be okay with if you're going to come along to the session. It's not a choice. This person is using it because that's them and that's their life, and I think we have to be sensitive and very aware of that.
So I love this next question, possibly because I've been called fantastic, but what is the one thing each panel member and our fantastic moderator, thank you, would want us to take away from today? So I don't mind starting. The whole premise of even organising this was that I wanted people to understand that, yes, it's Ada Lovelace Day, and yes, we want to celebrate women, but let's think about what being a woman in tech means, and also, you know, like I said, how to engage allies and champions. The amount of diversity events that I've been to where I don't take my notebook out anymore because we've been told about flexible working and maternity policies and we've got to do all this stuff, but actually let's talk to those that aren't quite sure about what to do, and have a very frank and honest conversation, which hopefully we've been able to deliver today. We've still got some time to answer your questions, but also I want everyone to take away and ask questions that they wouldn't feel comfortable asking normally. And obviously that's putting a lot of pressure on the panel members, but you know, when would anyone feel confident to say, what does queer mean and can I use it? I don't think that I would feel confident asking someone in a real life situation. So hopefully we can get some more questions that you wouldn't feel comfortable asking via the chat box or the Q&A box, and hopefully we can get them answered today so that people feel empowered, particularly those that don't identify and do identify as an ally or champion. I want them to feel empowered and confident to have these honest conversations and, you know, drive the way, be the first person to use pronouns, be the first person to consider others, even though it may not directly affect you. And that's the only way to make some real change. So fingers crossed I achieve these things with the amazing help of the panelists, and yeah, keep the questions coming in. I'm loving it. Cade, do you want to give your thing of what you want the audience to take away today?
Sure. I think it boils down to, I would like the audience to take away that just be respectful towards your trans colleagues or trans acquaintances or people in the spaces that might be trans, and acknowledge that their identities aren't choices, those are how they identify. It's not optional to misgender someone. It's not optional to really halt the conversation or disengage and just kind of disingenuously write them off. They're there, they're part of the community, they need to be part of the community. And if you think through their needs, just being respectful, it actually doesn't take that much energy from you, but it will make their day a lot better.
Katie?
Sure, let me have a little think. So I guess two things here. One is very similar to Harriet, which is I really hope people can just ask questions. I often see and hear and feel the fear around not knowing, and that sometimes comes with the fragility that people carry around with them, and actually not being confident enough to ask questions. So again, really encourage people to ask questions, and I want people to go away from this and do something. So I think maybe later on, I don't know if we're going to get time, I can share part of my experience of being discriminated against. And I went to my manager, I went to my boss, and I said, this is something that's happened to me in plain day, like in an office. And they were like, right, so what? And I would like every person on this call to think about, if they were that person and if someone was coming to you, what is something that you could do, which isn't just a and what response.
Thank you, Katie. Just so everyone knows, there'll be a couple more themes that hopefully we can squeeze in. One of them will be sexism in the workplace, which we've got a question of, and I've already got some predefined questions of. I also want to dive into like the benefits and how someone can be an ally and champion and empower people on the call today to feel confident to do so. And then I also want to just bring it back to the workplace, which is what today is all about, and talk about some initiatives and things that people can implement that have worked well. So Rachel, do you want to give your takeaway and then we'll move on to sexism?
Yeah, so I think similar for me, the main takeaway, something I'm really passionate about is helping people be allies and sponsors. Really, that's one thing that I would really love, and I'm loving the conversation that's happened thus far. I think, you know, the community that I run, we've talked about, you know, we had a talk on how to discuss pronouns in the workplace, so we had to talk about masturbation, like not in the workplace, and you know, we want to challenge these topics head on, and yeah, it's really refreshing.
Masturbation in the workplace.
It wasn't in the workplace, it was pronouns in the workplace and masturbation, but not in the workplace.
I'm only teasing you, each to their own. Right, sexism. Love it. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. People are lolling on the chat. No one turned their webcam on. Right. Right, hang on a minute. Come on. what should I do if my boss is being homophobic towards me, but I can't say anything because if I do, he'll take my work visa away. I'm a Mexican designer working in New York. And Katie, I'm going to fire that question over to you, but I also think it'd be great, I know you just touched on it, but to talk about your personal experiences about sexism in the workplace, because I think it's such a great story to share, but also how can you deal with it in a professional professional matter? Sorry, my head's gone after that. How can you deal with sexism when it's you individually that's experiencing it in a professional matter? So that would be great, Katie, if you can take that one.
Okay, yeah, so we've got two things here. So the question in the chat from Daniel is around homophobia in the workplace. It's really tricky. There's no silver bullet. There's no easy answer for this. What I would do. So what's the question? I would question. I know this is a really difficult thing to say, and it's quite a privileged thing to say actually. I'm recognizing that as I say it. But if you work for an organisation where your manager may take away a work visa because of your sexuality or your gender or how you define it in any capacity, is that the organisation you want to work for? I say that understanding that sounds like a relatively privileged thing to say, is not everybody has a choice of where to work. I would check what policies are in place. So every organisation should have policies in place to protect people, and each of those will link to the 2010 Equalities Act. And under the Equality Act, your sexuality is covered. So basically that means it's illegal to discriminate against someone due to their gender, due to their sexuality, due to gender reassignment, their biological sex. So I would just do as much as you can in terms of researching what policies, what things are in place. Do you have a HR department? What do they say? And then what support groups are there? So are there any networks that you can talk to? Are you part of a union that you can talk to? Do you have fair treatment ambassadors in your workplace? It really depends, obviously, where you're working and what's surrounding it. There are also some external support organisations, I think hopefully we can post in the chat later on as well, which may be able to advise. If it's something you would actually like to talk to your manager or your boss about, obviously it's really difficult, isn't it, for us to have those conversations, that emotional and mental capacity it takes to have these conversations. It really depends sort of how open you feel about actually speaking to that person themselves. What are they saying? Have you tried to open up a conversation before then? One thing that I do within DfE, so Department for Education, is run awareness sessions on the LGBTQ+ community, what it means. I think I get lots of questions around my sexuality, so not my current workplace, but previously, questions about like, so do you have like threesomes a lot? Masturbation threesomes, we're getting it all this evening. But you're bi, does that mean you have a lot of threesomes? Like questions like that. And actually some of it is an education piece. Yeah, I'd really encourage you to reach out to your HR team to check your policies. Remember, you are protected by the Equalities Act. Who else can you reach out to? What external organisations? And Daniel, you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. And this community is here for you. I'm so sorry that you're going through this right now. You shouldn't be. And I really hope you get the right support. And that guy, oh, there you go. That was my gender. Oh God, that was my bias then. That was my complete bias. Oh gosh, that's me owning up.
I will try in from the US perspective, as Daniel is based in New York. New York State passed the laws in 2003 that bars sexuality discrimination in the workplace. So it is illegal. You do want to, if you are considering confronting and there is any backlash or discrimination, I would suggest actually talking with, there's a, not Lambda Law, it's, I'm gonna think of it in a second, but there's a law group based out of the New York Center that is LGBT lawyers that do pro bono work that you might want to contact. And if you connect with me, I can send you that information.
Thanks so much, Kate. And Katie, it's so easy to slip up. So just remember Kate's advice when, if you do slip up, obviously Katie has not meant that at all. You just apologise and hopefully that there's, you know, the receiver knows there's no malintent, but it really does show how easy it is to slip up. So apologies, everyone. Katie, just on the conversation of sexism, just a last question from me. What do you do if you are in the recruitment process and you're a hiring manager and you experience sexism from, say, a colleague who is on the board or the interview board or the panel, or from a candidate? Like, what do you do in that professional light when you're the one seeing it? How can you make that situation better?
Okay, yeah, so we have two different perspectives there. You have the candidate's perspective. So if I imagine in this scenario, it may be that you're if you're the candidate and you're in an interview and someone's speaking to you in a derogatory way or being sexist towards you, it's completely up to you how you would do it. From a candidate point of view, I would encourage them to challenge or ask or question that behaviour. I think people need to often remember that interviews are for a company to interview you and for you to interview whether you actually want to be part of this organisation. And I would take the opportunity to just clarify what the person means. So ask sort of reconfirming questions. I would ask them to explain what they meant by that. But you could also obviously follow things up with, if, for example, you don't want to say anything, you don't feel confident enough in that setting, in an interview setting, follow it up, find out who the organisation is, what standards they are held to, if it's something across government. So I recruit for government. If it's there, there's like a much higher civil service conduct that a lot of people are held to. And I would reach out to those people either in the space or afterwards. If you are a panel member or someone who's recruiting for your team, again, this is in the UK I'm talking about, remember it is absolutely illegal to discriminate against someone because of their biological sex, because of their gender, because of gender reassignment, or for their sexuality. So you have to be very aware of that. So there are some easy things you can do. It may be that you're doing name blind recruitment or blind recruitment, which basically means you take away all types of information. You just see the person's experience and why they want the role. If you're sitting there as a panel member and, for example, a member alongside you says something, think about the best way for you to intervene and you to just correct them. If you're the panel chair, I would take the opportunity to just literally correct them as you're there, but also respecting that's a learning journey for that person. There's loads of things you can do, and it's very easy to be discriminated against or have your own biases and not realise it as well. So I would say if you're the recruiter, make sure what you're doing is held to an account. Make sure you've got someone who's independent, who can sort of hold their ground when speaking with you and your other panel members. And if you're a candidate and you experience it, if you feel comfortable, ask reaffirming questions, make sure you understand what's being said. And if it is sexist behaviour, then obviously you can report it.
Thanks, Katie, so much. And I suppose that moves us on to a conversation around allies and champions. So, Rachel, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What would you say the benefits are of being an ally or sponsor? And also, how can you be one if you're not already? I know that Triangirls does some workshops and things like that around this, so it'd be great to get your insight.
Yeah, so I guess there's two questions there. One was, what is the benefit of being an ally? And I guess it's twofold. So there's another thing called sponsorship. So within the workplace, you can lift those people, you know, and especially minorities. And some companies actually do like a professional sponsorship scheme. But actually, sponsorship accounts for 20% of promotions within the workplace. And the more senior your sponsor, the faster you will be promoted. So, you know, if you feel like you're in a position of power or in the more dominant group in the workplace, you know, and you can really see someone shining, don't be afraid to and also I think doing this in a public space as well, like sometimes people DM me like, oh, that was a good idea. I'm like, say it in the channel, like, why are you DMing me? So their boss can hear, or email someone's boss and, you know, just tell them what a good job someone's doing, because, you know, that could be the leg up that they need. And so I guess, you know, that's twofold. Like, one, you're doing a really nice thing for someone, and for them, you know, like that could be the promotion that they've been looking for. But also with regard to allyship, and I think more poignant to what we're talking about today, is you know, if you can't be your whole self at work, so for example, LGBTQ plus, if, you know, if you're in a work environment and you can't talk honestly about what you did at the weekend, imagine how draining that is, just having to, I guess, lie, or, you know, just not be able to talk about who you are. And I think being an ally in that sense as well is having those discussions and making it clear that, you know, you can bring your whole self to work. And, you know, psychological teams is proven are just like tenfold more successful. So it's, you know, it's a benefit to everyone. You know, people feel themselves at work, you know, you're getting the best out of your team. It's just win-win. Like there isn't any downside of being an ally or a sponsor for people.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I'm just so conscious of time, so I just want to also have some quick conversations around what you can do as an organisation, because we really have spoken about what you can do as an individual, both in your personal life, but also as an ally or champion in the workplace. But let's talk about it from an organisational level. I know there's a couple of people that signed up that will be in charge of diversity and inclusion within an organisation, and also those that may have KPIs, so key performance indicators around diversity. So Katie, over to you. Let's discuss an organisation, they're at ground zero. How can they be more inclusive? I mean, you can talk about gender here and about LGBTQ plus, and also just a second caveat question to that, if you've done any impactful initiatives that are related to employees within DfE, please also share those if something's worked well or any failures. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So what could a company do if they're starting at zero? Loads of different things. The first thing maybe I would suggest people do is take a little look at who's currently in your workforce and ask the people who are currently working for you in your organisation, sorry, I talk with my hands, what you can do, because you can ask us who've got no idea who your organisation is. I think it's so valuable to get the insight and perspective of what it's like to work day to day in your organisation. So have a little look at, for example, if you collect data, have a look at diversity data if you do collect it, but also get that qualitative data. So get that data and get some understanding from the people around you and in your organisation. What could you be doing better? It's often, I think, quite hard for people who work in D&I teams to think, oh, what can I be doing better? When you don't have it informed by the people that your decisions and your policies and your benefits actually impact. I would take a little look at your branding, so your external branding that's going out to people and it's going out to your employees. What pictures are you using? What words are you using? What language are you using? Is it accessible? Is it inclusive? There are companies that have people who might be on this call who have been companies for years and years and years and haven't really looked at their brand, or are using the same stock images that they were using years ago and they're outdated. And actually what people want to do is look at an organisation and see a version of themselves, or actually think, I could be safe here, or I could work here. I think that's so important to note, because people who identify as LGBTQ plus, or however they identify, if they don't fit into a norm, it can feel quite intimidating joining a new workforce. So have a think about that. What are you doing to outwardly project this message to those people who be prospective joiners, the people who are internal? I think somebody shared earlier the importance of giving people a voice. So what you're definitely not doing is outing people or ask people out themselves in the workplace. But you can go out and you could say, is anybody, or does anybody define as LGBTQ plus? Would anybody be interested in giving feedback or sharing their experiences? So one of the things that we found really impactful at DfE, we do a whole selection of different things, from doing talk sharing my lived experience. So I do talk sharing what it was like to face a lot of discrimination in my previous workplace on my gender. So I was called a dolly bird. Multiple people very openly asked how I got my job, insinuating that I got my job from sexual favours. There was loads of things that literally were said out in public, which is absolutely ridiculous. And other people experience that on a daily basis, loads of types of discrimination, but because we don't openly say, oh yeah, me too, I was also called this, or someone also said this about me, or someone also constantly misgendered me, I think it empowers people to talk if you have someone who's willing to talk. And if you don't, that's fine. Go out and work for charity, go out and work for an organisation, reach out to Mermaids, which is a charity, reach out to Stonewall, find out what indexes you can actually be part of. So one of the things that DfE did recently in 2018 is start signing up to the Stonewall Index. Stonewall, for those people who don't know, is the UK's leading LGBT charity. And there's an index you can sign up to, and you have to show that you meet certain things. So for example, what's your induction process like? What's your support networks like? What are your channels for actually submitting a complaint? There are loads of different things. And then you get basically put on this index, and then prospective candidates can go on and search the index for your company. And I speak to people every day who have actually gone on and actually searched and said, the reason I work at DfE is because I saw you on the index and I thought I'd be safe to work here. That's a huge thing. So there are loads of little things you can do, but start by looking internally. Who is there? Who can give you feedback? Seek like external viewpoints of this as well. Look at the image you're projecting. Look at the people you're raising up. So going back to Rachel's point, who are you raising up? Who are you giving a chance to speak? Is it balanced, or is it the same old same? DfE, we do LGBT awareness sessions. So we go around to different groups, to different teams, to leadership. And recently I've been working with our Black, Asian and minority ethnic community and network to do LGBT awareness sessions. So a lot of the questions we get are around, why is gender and sexuality different? Because it's just not taught well enough in our education system. So loads of things you can do. They're just some ideas, and I'm happy to share more if people want to reach out on LinkedIn or on the chat.
Thank you, Katie. I think we're going to have to continue this discussion offline because we've got so many questions and it's nearly 7 o'clock and I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface. So I think we'll have to do a final question now as it's 3 minutes to, and I'm very conscious that people do have lives and probably haven't had their dinner yet, and they've probably been on Zoom calls all day. So Kate, I thought it was really interesting when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I know it's slightly different from America, so if you could just try and get as much info as you can in there for UK and US based. I know we've got both on the call. But let's talk about parental leave policy and topics for discussion being about trans male pregnancies, lesbian gay couples and adoption, and how we can improve our policies to make sure they are inclusive, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So there's definitely a couple of different things. This is a huge topic. The general rule of thumb that I have is equal leave policies regardless of gender. There are, I know that in the UK, the law is such that anyone who gives birth is listed as a mother, regardless of how they identify. You are a mother on the birth certificate, and you are therefore in the maternity leave, regardless of how you identify. And trans people do have children, they do reproduce, they do carry pregnancies, regardless of how they identify. And so it ends up being potentially a subject of discrimination against a transmasculine person in the workplace when they try to go talk with their HR person, talk with whoever is doing the leave policy and trying to get that leave negotiated. Because if that person isn't open to, hey, there is someone who identifies on the masculine spectrum who's also pregnant in the workforce, it becomes a very difficult and alienating conversation, and people tend to actually potentially leave organizations when this happens. The way that you can kind of combat this is by changing all of the language in a company's policy from pregnant woman to pregnant employee, and just take the gender out of it, because everyone is an employee and pregnancy is not dependent on particular gender identities. So switching things to employee, making it leave across the board equal, because when you go out of the transgender space and into the the LGB space or the Q space, you get parents that may or may not be splitting time after an adoption. They might be surrogacy. There might be a lesbian couple who one of them's carrying and one of them's not. But after birth, one of them wants to be the more dominant parent, one of them wants to go back to work quickly. And it's a negotiation, it's a talk within their relationship. And if the policy is set up that it's dictated by a heterosexual, the women will take time post-birth and the men will then go back to work, it's very unequal for both the child and the family unit itself. The US is far behind the UK in terms of parental leave in general. And so this is a much more in-depth conversation over here. But there's work to be done on both sides. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh, is there, sorry, Kate, is there something else you want to say?
No, that was just basically my spiel.
Sorry, we've just got people saying they've got to sign off now and I can see everyone dropping. So I am going to leave it to that just to respect everyone's time. But I'm going to have some serious thought because there's a lot of questions we haven't answered and we've only just scratched the surface. So I'll put the feelers out, and if people are up for a second session, please do connect with me and share your feedback. And if you do think, you know, it's worth putting a second session on, please do let me know. My talks and events are always driven by what the community needs and wants. So please just share that feedback with me. But just to close, I just wanted to say thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Of course, BEEqual is always, always, always on the lookout for speakers, sponsors, hosts. I know we can't do in-person events, but we can at least try and imagine and hope that we can and all meet in person. So please do get in touch if you want to get involved. And I know all the panelists here will be happy for you to connect with them on LinkedIn and continue the discussion. But if not, we'll see you all at a second session. And just to add here, I know it's a really difficult time at the moment with COVID and people being out of work. East Energy Solutions is the company I work for that powers BEEqual. We're a tech consultancy and we are always, always on the lookout for amazing, amazing people to lead on our projects. And I'm responsible for making sure that group's diverse. So, you know, if you do want the confidence to work at an amazing organisation such as DfE, they're one of our clients that are absolutely inclusive, then please do reach out for me and I can talk about next steps. I don't normally do that spiel on an event, but bearing in mind people are in tricky positions with work at the moment, please do use me as a leading post and a point of contact for feedback or new opportunities. But anyway, thank you all so much. I'll be in touch with the recording probably tomorrow because the Wi-Fi is so slow with everyone putting a telly on in Tunbridge Wells. And if you've got any questions, just fire it over to me. And thanks again to the amazing panelists. Thanks everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.